This week we're beginning a new series, and it's something that I'm very excited to talk about. Some of you may have heard of and even have seen the video by a man named Louis Giglio. It's one of his talks is the same title, Indescribable, and it's a wonderful bit of information that he goes over. Louis Giglio is the pastor at the church where Chris Tomlin is the worship leader, and so you've probably heard at least one of those two names, if not both of them. And then about once a year, these two guys, they'll travel around, and Louis will preach a sermon while Chris leads a time of worship, and then he has a theme song that usually goes along with it. So the theme song, Indescribable, went with a sermon that Louis Giglio presented, and it's very similar in nature for the most part to what we're going to talk about today. And hopefully I've just sort of wrapped up a lot of what he said, but that's not really the purpose for the whole series. We're going to talk a little bit about God as a creator and how he's indescribable, and then we're going to go on to some of his other indescribable type qualities, like his mercy and his grace and his love and his kindness and all those, and his holiness and those sorts of things as we move forward. But hopefully I'm just going to give you an overview of how indescribable God is as a creator. There are just simply no words to describe God. If you were to sit down with someone who had never heard of the concept of a God, which is pretty unusual because most people have some sort of concept of God or what God is, or some higher power or however they may describe it. But for you and I, we understand it to be the one true God. And if you go into a conversation with someone, you kind of get to a point where you're at a loss for words other than just to say, well, he's really big. Right? He's really, really big. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about today too, is just how big this God of ours is. Not that we will ever be able to figure that out and nail that down today, but we're going to talk about it and try to get some grasp of it at least. You may be familiar with the name David from the Bible. King David, he wrote a lot of the Psalms that we have, and we're going to look at a couple of them. But David, before he was the king of Israel, he was a shepherd boy. And he spent a lot of time outdoors, a lot of time out in the field with the sheep, and I'm sure he spent a lot of time looking up at night into the stars, and there, of course, was no electricity, no light, so there was nothing necessarily blocking his view of the stars, and I can't imagine how beautiful that was. We were in the mountains not long ago, and up in New Mexico, and just removing yourself from a city, you get a really good view. In fact, that was the first time I had a view of where you could see the satellites even streaming across the sky. Of course, David didn't have any satellites to look at, but he had a great view of the heavens and of the sky. And so he understood the vastness of space, and what he saw as he looked out was a reflection of God. It looked to him like that's exactly the only way to describe an indescribable God. And so if you have your Bibles, we're going to turn to a couple places. One of them is Psalm 19, as he tries to describe the heavens in godly terms. Psalm 19, verse 1. If you can't see, we have it up on the screen. Psalm 19, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. David says to us, to everyone, that the sky itself is proclaiming the goodness and the glory of God. Oftentimes in life, we or someone we know has spent time searching for God. Who is God? What is God? Is there a God? And we know people like that all around us. People that want to know, is there really a God? Well, what David's telling us is all you have to do is look up. Now, I heard an atheist view of this one time as someone was trying to tell them, just look up and look at the clouds and look at the sky. And the atheist was like, oh, please, as if that really points us to God. But the reality is even the more you look in depth at the sky, the more it points to no other source but God. So things that are in existence all around us point to the existence of God. And of course, most people, especially those atheists, they just deny all of this. They chalk it up to chance or circumstance. But the proof is there that there is a God, and He is so big. But aren't you glad of that? I mean, I don't want to serve a God that I could measure or that I could fit into this box that I try to often put God in. God is beyond even that. Now, I'm not a scientist, and we're not going to solve any great mysteries of creation today, but there's one thing that almost everyone agrees on, and that is that the entire universe started in a moment. Whether you believe in creation or the Big Bang, it happened in a moment. It all began in an instant when everything began to expand out from a single source. Science once said that the universe is expanding at the speed of light. But there's a problem with that. If the universe is expanding out at the speed of light, there's a little law that we have bought into, that we believe in 100%. It's called the law of gravity. And because of the law of gravity, what that says is the law of gravity is constantly pulling. So if there's a pulling motion while something is pushing, you're going to slow the pushing down. Now we're going to get back to why that's such a big problem in a few moments. But scientists have said that this universe that we live in is way too oversized, which you can stop and think about the reality of that. If we're the only living creatures in this entire universe, it's a little bit oversized, don't you think? It's a little kind of on the ridiculous side, in fact, if we're the only thing here. But what that means to us as Christians is that my God is very big too. And again, I'm very thankful for that. I want my God to be that big. And so as we look into the universe, we see it proclaiming God's glory, not with words, but just with its being. It proclaims the glory of God. It's like this giant billboard that's free for us to look at every night and to see that God is really, really, really big and we are really small. So let's talk now about how big God is. In Genesis 1:1, it says that before there was anything else, there was God. Now, not everyone buys that, but that's why we have to look at these pointers that we're going to get to. Why it's so important for us to examine what is there for us to look at. We have to examine it and find the evidence of it. So the evidence of whether He exists or not is there for us to find. Then Genesis goes on to tell us that God, who was there before anything, created light. He just spoke it into existence. He said, "Let there be light," and there was light. He didn't grunt. He didn't groan. He didn't even put forth a great deal of effort other than just speaking, "Let there be light." And all of a sudden there was light, and light began to expand out throughout the universe. Now, does anyone know how fast light travels? Off the top of your head, anyone? 186,000. I knew somebody would know, and I figured it might be Dean or Eric if he were here. 186,000 miles per hour is the speed per second. Yeah, I'm sorry, per second. You're right. I was trying to slow it down. 186,000 miles per second. And I can't really help you grasp just how fast that is, other than we'll talk about how fast it takes to get from the sun to here. So our world and our universe was created at this incredible rate of speed, because as soon as light struck, when God spoke the word, light goes out at 186,000 miles per second. So it means with the sun, when God created it, He placed it 93 million miles away from Earth. It's exactly 93 million miles away from Earth. If it were a little further, we would all freeze to death. If it were a little closer, we would all burn up. A lot of us have heard that. But it's just the right spot for us to survive and to thrive on this planet. So for light to travel from the sun to the earth at 93 million miles away at 186,000 miles per second, it takes 8 minutes for light to get from the sun to the earth and to your tan skin. So God said, let there be light, and there was, and all of this happened at once. So what else? What else points us to the glory of God and his indescribable characteristics? Well, if you'd like to turn to Isaiah chapter 40, we're going to look through a few verses there. Isaiah chapter 40. It's going to give us an idea of just how big God is. Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 12. It says, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marks off the heavens? Well, that is a very big God, that he measures the heavens with his hand. So he measures with his hand what we measure in light years. Well, what's light years? Light years is how far it takes for light to travel at the speed that it travels in 1 year, which is approximately 5.88 trillion miles. Now, trillion has kind of become messed up for us as a word because it's hard for us to grasp how much that is, because when we talk about our debt as a country and we talk about the trillions of dollars that we're in debt, now that we have a name associated with it, we don't understand how big that is. But it is crazy, crazy big. And so you talk about trillions of miles, 5.88 trillion miles for 1 light year, and you talk about several light years, and God measures that with his hand, just his hand. That makes God incredibly and indescribably big. Verse 12 goes on. Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on the scales and the hills in a balance? Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord, or instruct the Lord as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him? And who taught him the right way? With whom then will you compare God? To what image will you liken him? Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. To whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? We start to get a glimpse of just how huge God is. That he takes this massive expanse of a universe and uses it as a canopy. And he sits enthroned above the earth. That is a big God. So we're going to look first at a picture of the Milky Way. You'll probably recognize that. That's our Milky Way. Now, that's not a picture that anybody took. That's a recreation. We've never gone outside of our Milky Way to take an actual picture of it. The Voyager has actually just broken a record to go the furthest that anything has gone, and it's outside of our solar system. It's not outside of our Milky Way. So we don't have a picture of our Milky Way that some machine has actually taken. This is just a recreation, the best that we can get. But this is our galaxy. This is our home. It's 100,000 light years. Remember how far a light year is? 5.88 trillion, right? And then 100,000 of those across. That's huge. We so easily look at this picture and go, oh, that's just the Milky Way. It's ginormous. It is so big. To measure our solar system, just our solar system, if you go down to our planets to the next slide, that's just our solar system. If we measure that out, and it changes all the time, right? Sometimes Pluto's a planet, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a moon, so the actual size of it varies. But if you want to get an idea of how big just our solar system is within the vastness of our Milky Way, if you go out to our parking lot and place a quarter down in the middle of it, and then compare that quarter to America, that's how big our solar system is compared to the Milky Way. The Milky Way. It is huge. And God measures it with the breadth of his hand. That's a big God. So, God, you look at the stars at night, and there's a ton of stars, right? There's a lot. And as I said, like if you go up in the mountains and you look up, you see even more stars. And there's just an enormous amount of stars up there. And you would think, man, it's just impossible to count all those stars, to know all the stars. And in a sense, you're right. Have you ever drawn the night sky on a piece of paper? You ever, you as a kid, you draw a night sky and you put the moon and then you put a bunch of dots, right? Now, would you say that if you ever made a picture like that you knew those dots very intimately? No, probably not. We just put a bunch of dots down there. But what God does is he sprinkles our sky with a bunch of stars. And the Bible tells us that he knows those intimately, that he has names for every single one of the stars, and he knows how many they are, even though we can't even count them all. That's how big God is. So in the center of our solar system, we have the sun. It's not the biggest or the brightest star, but it's just right for us. If you travel out from our sun and you go 440 light years away, you're going to find Pleiades. Sorry, go back one. Yeah, to Pleiades. That's Pleiades. It's up in our night sky, but it's 440 light years away. The book of Amos refers to Pleiades as the seven sisters. Then if you travel 600 light years away from our sun, an additional number of light years away, you're going to find Betelgeuse. So that was that next picture. That's Betelgeuse. Betelgeuse is not as brilliant or as bright as our sun in the sky, but don't you know that it's 1,000 times bigger than our sun? 1,000 times bigger than our own sun. Maybe you've never seen it before, but it's been there. And do you know what it's been doing while it's there? Declaring the glory of God. That's what they do. They declare God's glory. It's a part of the Orion constellation. You've probably seen it in the night sky because it's one of the brightest stars, but it's so far away it just looks like a tiny dot, even though it's 1,000 times bigger than our sun. Now, if you go out further and you go out 1,000 light years from our sun, you get to Vela Pulsar, which is a pulsar. That's this one. This one is spinning. It's rotating, constantly oscillating at 11 times per second. The entire thing. Imagine how fast that thing is moving at 11 times per second. And what's it doing while it oscillates and rotates? Proclaiming the glory of God. How big our God is. And David got that. That's why he writes in Psalm 8, verse 3, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You've made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." How can you look at all these marvelous things, all the vast expanse of our universe, everything inside of our own earth, and not be amazed by God? And then to think, in all of this, He cares about me. With all this other stuff going on, and even though our solar system within the Milky Way is a quarter, somewhere on top of that quarter is like a speck of a dot, and that's the Earth, and somewhere on that Earth is me, and God still sees me and knows me and wants me to know Him. He is so amazing. We're so small. As we look at this picture of the Earth, as we look at our solar system, we might get lost and think that we are insignificant. But we are not insignificant in God's eyes, and we're certainly not abandoned insignificant. What we are is we are significantly insignificant. We are tiny, we are just a speck, but man, we're significant according to God. He loves you so desperately. He loves you. and he loves me. So here's a picture of our Earth. This is from Apollo 17. Some of you may remember the Apollo missions. I actually was probably more aware of them than a lot of kids because my grandfather worked on them, so he was always sending me some pictures. This isn't one that he sent me. I just got this one off the internet, but it's from Apollo 17. As you look at the Earth from this perspective, it doesn't play into our idea and our perspective here on Earth because there's something sort of missing there. Because you can't see the mountains, right? You can't see people or skyscrapers. Your perspective changes, and you can't see all these big things. You can't even see the malls or the problems, the wars, the famines. You can't see you or me, and not just because it's pointed at Africa, but just because we can't see anybody on that picture of Earth. We all live on this ball that's suspended perfectly in space by an indescribable God. So we've talked about Voyager, and probably many of you remember that Voyager being sent out, and what a big deal that was. And we've had some fantastic pictures sent back to us of the planets around our solar system, because Voyager has been going and going ever since it got sent out. In fact, it's still going. It just broke that record of getting outside of our solar system. And even the scientists who were working on Voyager sort of got kicked to the curb when Voyager wasn't doing a whole lot and it was just spinning its way through space. And so they weren't even allowed in the building at NASA where they once had an office, and they were meeting for a while in a hotel room down the road because they wouldn't let them in the office building. But now that Voyager's doing some crazy things, they're allowed back in. They actually have their own office, and Voyager's sending back these incredible pictures. Well, they were sent out in 1977. In 1990, 13 years after it left Earth, it looked back and it took a picture of Earth. It captured this photograph. Now, it's kind of hard to point out, so it's circled. It's just a dot on the screen. Those streaks and those lines are just light reflections that are on the lens, so those aren't actually in space. But all you can see is that little tiny dot as you look back at Earth. When they zoomed in a little bit on it is the next one, and that's what they got. And it's just this little termed a pale blue light. So from the vast expanse of space, you look back and you see Earth. Think about your daily problems. Think about the people you come in contact with, and then take this perspective. Man, we're just out here, just this pale blue dot. You can understand why it changes your perspective. Carl Sagan was one of the scientists involved with the Voyager project, and he was one of the first people to see this picture, especially once they enlarged it, and it really began to sink in with him. And he made a statement about what he saw, and he said this: "Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint, every sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. Man, he's bleak. But you look at that and you begin to think, wow, that's all we are. In space. That's it. But I don't agree with what he said at the end, because we do have hope. We do have hope. And something from outside does infiltrate our lives. Something from outside is there to give us hope, that wants to save us from ourselves. And that someone sent his only Son to prove it. Remember, I told you that we would come back to the expansion of the universe. So here's the idea behind what I was talking about. The earth began expanding, or not the earth, the universe began expanding at the rate of light speed. But you have this pull of gravity, which tells you that at some point that expansion should be slowing down. And so even if it were as quickly slowing down as cutting light speed in half at certain times, it's never going to come to an end. Just like if I told you to cut something in half forever, you could pretty much do that forever, even though it would get pretty minuscule at some point. But if you keep cutting in half, you can always do that forever and ever. So if light speed were slowing down, it would slow down in half forever and ever and ever. The problem is some brilliant scientists figured out how to measure the expanse of the universe, and what they came up with was that the universe indeed was not slowing down, but it was speeding up. It's going against the very law of gravity that we have bought into, and we say it's a law. But here this universe is expanding at a great rate of speed, and what those scientists actually said was, we can't explain it. There's some unnatural force that's driving the universe to continue expanding, and we don't have a reason for it. Well, I do. God. How hard is that? That doesn't mean that our laws have to work 100% of the time, because God made the laws, and he can make them do whatever he wants them to do. So our universe continues to expand at a faster rate of speed than we thought, because God is smarter than we are. And he has it all figured out. And to me, that's just funny. I read those words and I just go, what? You can't explain it? Some unnatural force, you say? Yet you refuse to believe in a God who created the universe and put these laws in motion, that it almost doesn't make sense to believe the way they believe and the way they expect you to believe. God is bigger than our universe. As big as that is, there's something else they can't explain. As they look deep into space, 31 million light years. Golly, I'm blowing your mind, right? 31 million light years away from us, there is a galaxy. At the center of this galaxy, there's a black hole. And the black hole is creating a phenomenon that the scientists call the X factor. But why don't you look at it? I don't call that an X factor. I call that a cross factor. And I could just see God sitting in heaven watching these brilliant scientists look at this galaxy going, I can't explain it. And God's going, I know. And my grace is evident in everything, even 31 million light years away. I still show you my grace. As you look, you think you're so smart, but I'm bigger than you could ever imagine, and I'm greater. He is an amazing God. He is indescribable, and everywhere we look, his glory is being proclaimed right in front of us. But do we want to believe? Do we want to believe that he's there, that he's capable of handling our most difficult problems. When you begin to view God as indescribable, when you begin to view God as this person, this personal force that's out there that created this entire universe, and you begin to view him as someone who wants to have a relationship with you, then you begin to see a fraction of how much God loves you, how much he cares for you. And you'll begin to see that God is bigger than your problems and your issues. And you begin to rely on him more. And the thought begins to pop in your head a little bit more. Man, if you can create this universe, you can certainly handle what I'm going through. So rather than deal with it myself, I'm going to give it to you. Because you're the reason for everything. And I want my problems to declare your glory, just as all these stars in the sky do as well. Are you going to buy into God? Are you going to buy into his hugeness and his indescribable qualities? That's a question for you to answer today. Let's pray.